Oh, thank you, David. What a wonderful world, right? Yeah, sometimes. I wanted to share a story about a Catholic monk. His name was Father Theophan Boyd, and he lived a majority of his life in a monastery just north of Snowmass, Colorado. If you've never been there, it's a pretty magical place. I've only been there once and gotten lost 5 times just trying to find it. You're coming down the road, and you know when Google Maps, they give you the name of a road that you're supposed to turn on? Well, the name of the road that you're supposed to turn on to get to this particular Benedictine monastery just north of Snowmass, Colorado, has no name. And so you're supposed to know that you're supposed to turn right at the Phillips 66 station. And you wind up this little road that goes and finally comes to a T. And at the T, there's a little sign about this big that says monastery with an arrow. And then you take a right and you drive for another mile and you get down the road. And then there's another sign about this big that says monastery and points this direction. And then you go another mile down the road and you actually get to the monastery. It is in the middle of a valley. Imagine the beautiful place where it sits. They own the entire valley. It is covered by mountain peaks on all sides. And in the bottom is the monastery and the school and the quarters where the monks stay. And on one side of the mountain, they have retreat cabins that people can rent for very cheap. And you can go there, you can stay for as long as you want and have this beautiful view of the mountains at your fingertips. And so this is the place where Father Theo spent the majority of his life, at this beautiful, breathtaking monastery. And he only wrote one book called The Tales of the Magic Monastery. And one of the stories he tells is that he would often go to retreat in the valley. About 3 miles from the monastery was a little cabin way, way, way out by itself. And if you're on the other side where you can rent one of the cabins, this is on the other side of the mountain where no one is allowed to go. And sometimes in the afternoon sun, you can see the glint of a tin roof so far away that you can't quite make out what it is. And that's where Father Theo would go all by himself and spend 3 months in meditation. And one of the stories he tells is he was there for 3 months, and he kept having this mantra almost come up. He kept listening for that word of God to rise within him, and he kept hearing this question of, what am I leaving out? He would ponder it for a while and hope that the answer would arise from within him. But he kept hearing the same question over and over again. What am I leaving out? And so finally, his 3 months were up. He hadn't heard the answer to the question, but he kept hearing it again and again in his head. And he tells the story as he was taking a walk back from this tiny little hut on this little cow path down back to the monastery, that this question of what am I leaving out kept arising within him. And at an exact moment when he was walking down the path, the sun came down and hit a rock and made the rock glisten. And he stood there for a moment, and he picked up the rock and he apologized for not noticing it sooner, and realized that there was all this incredible beauty all around him, that even something as simple as a rock could bring him great joy if he was paying attention. if he was being open to the possibilities, and he was being willing to find joy in the simplest of things that were all around him. And so I love this story because I actually got to meet Peggy Mulvihill. We met one day when we were doing a booth on the side of the road, and she didn't know about Unity Temple. She had actually been a student of Father Theo's for 20 years when she lived in Colorado. And I said, I had a big sign that said, "Meditate here." And she was very excited because she had meditated with Father Theo, and since she'd moved to Kansas City, she didn't think anybody in Kansas City meditated. And so she came up to my table and she said, "I'm very excited to find out that somebody in Kansas City is meditating. Where do I go?" And I go, "Here." "Where?" "Here." And that became a longtime friendship. Peggy Mulvihill actually started our youth meditation program that we have every morning on Sunday at 9 a.m. And so I loved hearing the stories that Peggy would tell me about spending time with Father Theo. And she said that it really was a magical experience, that he was one of those people that when you were with him, he just seemed to radiate light. And that when you were with him, he made you feel like you were the only person in the world. He would look so deeply into your eyes and smile and be so present with you. And that he did indeed find joy in the simplest things in life. Everywhere he looked, he found an opportunity to be grateful. And so I think about how many of us come here to Unity Temple and we're looking for something. Something feels missing. I often get an opportunity to stand out in the lobby, and I get to see people who come into Unity Temple for the very first time. And usually they're looking for the bathroom. And so I'm very happy to tell them where the restrooms are. I can do a very good job of pointing them out. But also, often they're looking for something else. Looking for a little peace in life. I know for me that's what happened when I first walked in the door. I thought, if I could just have a sense of peace. I am so tired of being stressed and anxious, frustrated and resentful. And when I walked in here, I thought maybe this is a place where I could find peace. There's a Buddhist teacher that points out that wanting to have a sense of peace is wonderful, fine and dandy, but craving peace is what causes us additional suffering. And it might seem counterintuitive, but if you are only hoping for peace in your life, when you don't find it, you may be anxious or frustrated or resentful. And really imagine what a life with nothing but peace would be like. Do we really want nothing that excites us? No challenges, no struggles, no frustrations? What if being peaceful all the time actually wasn't the point? The Buddhist teacher says it's okay to be in peace when it is being experienced, but to also at the same time accept those things that cannot be changed, to be open to the possibilities, and to be allowing of new experiences. And so it turns out that we can create a sense of peace, but in order to do so, we may have to experience things like being uncomfortable, of being scared and frightened. And when I was thinking about this, it reminded me of when I was a kid in grade school. I was the geekiest, scrawniest, sickliest, most socially awkward person in grade school, or at least that's what I saw myself as. So you know when you're in grade school and you're having a party and your mom makes you invite everybody in the class because she doesn't want anybody to feel left out? Those were the only parties I got invited to. But I was so uncomfortable that I can remember, it almost brings tears to my eyes now when I think about the day of the party would come, and my mother said that I had more stomach aches than any kid she had ever seen in her life, and she was a nurse. So I'd get the stomach ache, and I'd say, Mom, I don't feel like going. I think I'll just, I don't really want to go. Can we just send the present? I don't have to be there. I don't want to go. I had made up the story in my head, and it felt so uncomfortable to think about going to a place where I would be with other kids that I might not act appropriate or do something wrong, or that people would make fun of me, or all those other things that go through our mind when we think about going out into a situation that is unknown. And so for most of the time, my mom, would finally, I could really wear her down. She'd give in and go, okay, fine, you don't have to go to the party. But what I found is it was self-perpetuating. So then I didn't want to go to the parties. And then on Monday, when the kids would come back and everybody else had been to the party, but I hadn't been, I felt kind of like a social outcast. And so I remember that my mother decided that a good experience for me would be to go to church camp one summer. I thought this was a horrible idea. And I can remember distinctly sitting in the back of our Ford Fairlane as we're driving into the parking lot, and there's a whole lot of buses that are going to take the kids to church camp. Did anybody else have this experience? Oh, yeah. You don't know who the heck these people are. You don't know what you're going to do, and you're going to be away from home for a week. I felt my stomach start to hurt. I'm starting to complain, and I'm telling my mom all the rationalizations why I really don't need to go to church camp. And many of you know my mom. She was a lovely, sweet old lady. But man, she could be tough when she needed to. She pulled me out of the car and threw me in that bus. Well, okay, maybe it wasn't that brutal, but it felt that. At 10 years old, it kind of felt like that she was making me do this horrible thing. Like when you felt like your parents were the just meanest people in the world? You're making me go to church camp. And so I'm sitting on that bus, and my stomach is churning, and I'm just freaking out. And I get there, and I have to be in a room with somebody I don't know, and the bathroom's down the hall, and what happens if I have to, I don't know, I don't like this. Yeah, I ended up having a pretty good week. It actually ended up being fun. I enjoyed it. And I had to get past that feeling of being fearful, to being scared, of being uncomfortable with the uncertainty. And I would have never experienced the enjoyment of church camp if my mother hadn't simply made me go. And so I think about all those times in life when we want to step outside of our comfort zone, that there are things that we are missing in life, and that we can't quite make that first step out the door. I'd like to tell you that now, hey, I'm here, I'm standing up in front of all you guys and talking, right? I'm fine now. I can tell you I still have days. Now I have to officiate at weddings. I get to officiate at weddings. It's so wonderful. Everybody's so happy. They don't have an officiant at divorces. Well, sometimes they do. We do throw parties for those things. But at weddings, everybody's in a good mood. Everybody's excited, and it's the potential of all sorts of possibilities. And so I am going as the minister. And I can tell you, even today, I start to hear those conversations come up in my head. Oh, I don't want to go. Oh, I'm going to screw up. Oh, everybody's going to be looking at me, and then I'm going to say the wrong thing, and I'm going to ruin the wedding. And I learned that I just have to go through it. I step out and put one foot outside the door, and I get in the car, and I go. And 95% of the time, I actually have a delightful time. It is such a wonderful experience. And 5% of the time, it's a disaster. But I go anyway. I put myself out there, and I'm okay with that. And so I think as we go through life, we may be thinking that all we want is to have peace in our life. But really what we want to do is live. And in order to do that, we have to accept those things that we cannot change. We have to be willing to be open to the possibilities. And we have to be allowing of new experiences that might be scary and uncomfortable and even frightening. So as I thought about this idea of peace and this desire that we have for it, it's like going into the kitchen and wanting a cake, and opening the cupboard in the refrigerator and finding all the ingredients you need, and thinking that you don't have whatever you need to have a cake. Because with peace, it's not enough to just want it. We have to work towards it. We have to mix together all the ingredients. We have to be willing to go through the difficulties in life, the struggles, the crises, the frustrations, the disappointments, and the failures. Because there is a spiritual component of us where peace can be found in the midst of chaos. Where even when our heads are telling us that we are frightened and scared, we can cultivate a sense of peacefulness, even in the middle of the worst that we can imagine. And so I think about Father Theo, and I think about him simply finding that rock and seeing it as the joy to be discovered. And so I thought we could take these thoughts into meditation. This idea that we have the recipe, we have all the ingredients inside of us to cultivate a sense of peace, regardless of what's happening in our life. So let's take those thoughts into meditation.